In this video, let's talk about setting up a document for the poster project. So you're all familiar on how to set up a document in InDesign. I don't need to spend too much time. I'm just going to add a couple of additional components and really stress a couple of items that we've discussed before, but could really come in useful to us in the current application. Um, One thing that I really want to address here is that, well, first things first. So for the poster, I'm asking you to create a tabloid size document, so 11 by 17 inches. If you don't have it in your presets, you could check and print and see if that's available tabloid. Want to make sure pages are, we just need a one page. Leave columns at one. Make sure that you set margins to 1/2 inch, and if they're not set to this, make sure that you lock the proportions, so settings are kept the same, and make sure that we are at 0.5, and then let's set a bleed. And I'll talk about a bleed very quickly in a little bit, but let's establish why it's important. I believe I've mentioned it before in some other project. So I'm going to create just 1/8 of a bleed. That's pretty standard for print materials. So 1.25 inch is 1/8 of an inch. So leave it at that. Slug we're going to leave intact. Leave it at 0. That's not our concern, not our battle at this point. And I'm just going to click create. And what I should have is I should get a document like this. And you'll notice that you have two different color marks or guides here, right? The magenta one right here, as we've established before, that's your margins. So basically, this is your text area, right? This is where all the content or important content will be placed. Um, and you should avoid placing any content that is essential to the design, right, to your messaging outside of these margins. That said, that doesn't mean that you can't place images outside of this content or parts of images. That's absolutely is fine, but as text or any other materials should remain, that's why it's called a text area, within those margins that you set. Let's talk about the bleed very briefly. So the bleed is this red frame, and you'll notice that it sits outside of the boundaries of our document. And what bleed is really, it's helpful if you do choose to run artwork to the edge of the page, right? And that has to do with how press production work. Um, so on the press, when the artwork is printed on the sheet of paper and it comes out off the press and needs to be trimmed, right? And if you don't allow for the bleed or for 1/8 of an inch uh, extra outside of the boundaries of your page, what's going to happen is any misalignment when the poster is getting printed is going to leave you with a hair thin white line, or any other color line. So you just want to make sure there's enough print outside of the boundaries of your document to accommodate for any mishaps happening during printing. So what does that mean? So that means, again, if I create an artwork or I create some kind of an element, I'm going to just again create my favorite circle, right? And I'm going to very quickly fill it with black. Just gonna, oh, my bad. And click OK. So there we go. So I have a black. So if I'm placing something on the edge of the document, and I should very much so make sure that this element extends to the boundaries of my bleed, right? Whether you like it or not, leave yourself enough space or enough of that graphic or picture or photograph, whatever you're placing, it actually extends to that. So this is just basically to help for any for any incidents that might happen during trimming of the document, right? That's also possibly, if you're applying a solid color to the whole page. Let's say I'm trying to fill my whole document with a particular color, right? Or at least partially. Let's say I want a background color. I'm just going to create a frame and again fill it with, let's say, black. Okay, right. This is where the bleed comes in handy again, that you want to make sure that you extend this to the bleed of your document, right? So if printing occurs on any document, you want to make sure that there's enough color outside of the boundaries, because your document is not going to be printed to the edges of the paper itself, of the print paper itself. It's going to be trimmed out. And this is to help with that trimming and to make sure there's no mishaps that will obviously create tension and just will look sloppy in the end. That's why we need bleed. So secondly, what I want you to do with your document, I'm going to just delete everything, is I want you to now finally, and we've talked about grids a few times, again, and at this point I want you to set up a grid and try to work on the grid. There's not really a set rule for what grid to use. You'll read, and you'll hear multiple interpretations and philosophies on this. I'll tell you again how I think about grids, but again, you will ultimately find, you might actually find that you're adjusting your grid as you're working on your documents, right? Some publications or some print publications or websites or what have you are published on a set grids, but they vary. But what you want is basically it allows for modularity of your information. And grids also allow to set not only a structure, but also a rhythm to your document, right? To create spacing, to create even placement, and provide for continuity from page to page. So there is a certain sense of cohesion, especially if you're working with a large document or with a website that has multiple pages. So in this case, right, what I'm going to do, and I'll show you very quickly, I'm actually going to jump to this document very quickly. And if you notice, right, this is a poster that I've been working on for an art show. And what I'm, at initial sort of a glance at it, there's really not, there might be some order, there might be some sense of order, but there's really not an established order. But if we take a quick look at this, and I'm just going to unclick W, I'm in preview mode, you'll notice that I have a grid, and I'm actually working on a grid. And in this case, my grid is 12 by 8, right? So I have 12 columns and 8 rows. Why did I choose to do so? I normally choose a grid that's divisible by 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, what have you. It all depends on the amount of information you have. But in this case, I just selected a grid of 12 because I just wanted enough incrementation or enough increments that I can work with. And if you notice, all of my elements are actually, one way or another, are sitting on the grid. Again, there's not sort of a set rule, right, or a set of rules that you need to follow. But what this is helping me with is create alignment, create certain lines, minimize the amount of visible lines that might create distraction, and so on and so forth. So in this case, I decided that a lot of my information is going to sit on this grid line, right? And this right here is considered a gutter, right? And a gutter is often used to create some spacing or breathing room in between information on your pages. So if you notice, all of my information is sitting on the bottom line of the grid, of one of the grid rows, right? And it's aligned to this line of the second column. By the way, my grid is aligned to my margins. So there you go. So again, the same thing, even my artwork, if you notice, it is sitting on the grid lines, right? I'm aligning it to the grid. Everything here is actually sitting on the grid lines, right? And one way or another, visually or not, intuitively or what have you, it does, in my view, provide a set of rhythm. And again, this is not a finished product, but I'm already feeling good about it because I feel a sense of rhythm. I'm using the grid, and if I need to include any more information on art in here, I can actually go in and try placing it and modularly creating or keeping up with the same pattern, the same rhythm that I've already established. So I'm going to go back to my blank document here. And how do we create a grid? I'm going to remind you of that. So to create a grid, you need to go to Layout and Create Guidelines. And let's say you decide to establish the same grid as mine. What I did is I created 8 rows, and I'm going to create 12 columns. There's my grid, right? So, and I want to make sure that my guides are fit to margins, right here. If you have any other grids that are already on your page, make sure that you remove them. If I click OK, that grid is going to be there. Again, that's not a permanent imposition onto your document. These grid lines are actually there to help you lay out information. So if I start working with text and I create a text box, right, and start typing in there art show, right, I can now start sort of playing with placement of that of those elements according to the grids or the rhythm that is set up by that grid. So I'm just going to quickly set up my document. My little plus here says that I have information here. I have overset text. So I'm going to click fitting, fit frame to content, right? And now I can start aligning. Again, what I'm doing is I'm not just aligning the frame, I'm actually making sure that the elements here are being aligned to that grid, right? And there you go. Right now that box, because I created it to fit into my size, is actually going to accommodate my information, right? So that's a great start, right? So any consequent information that I'm going to place in here, I'm clicking W to switch into the preview mode, right? If I choose to do another block of information, I can always place it somewhere else, right, on that same grid, line it up, and there will be a sense of rhythm and there will be a sense of a structure or a system that is being established.